Jared, just a couple of members down here.
Okay, everybody, we're gonna come.
But they're trying to look at.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Judy.
Second, Dave.
Thank you. Any conflict of interest? Okay, we'll pass it over to Don for a procedural bylaw discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The staff report that was circulated with the package sort of addresses a number of questions that I think it's timely for this committee and ultimately the board to reflect on. But I'd like to say, I'd like to make a few introductory comments. When we're going to talk about our bylaw, you know, this is your document and it describes your rules. We have had a couple of circumstances over the last 2 years where we've been presented with circumstances that aren't covered in our bylaw. And when they're not covered, our source that we use is Robert's Rules of Order. We don't have to follow Robert's Rules of Order on any specific item that you would like dealt with differently. So that's one of the things that we are capable of doing. Over the last 2 years with a new mandate and a largely new board, questions are asked, why do we do things the way that we do? And it's about the lived experience of the organization and the individuals that have been on the board over the past 12 to 13 years. So it's appropriate that we have perhaps a more in detailed look than we typically do. Typically, what staff would do is we keep a log of things that didn't run that smoothly, and at the end of the year, we will sit down in this meeting and come with a few clauses that might be changed. I think it's time to step back and ask some broader questions. And the source of the questions that I've included in the staff report and that I think that we should discuss today, most of them came out of the MC advisory report. They were observations made by directors. The MC advisory report doesn't indicate if, you know, a majority of people felt this way. They just identify a number of issues that were discussed. And so I think that what we would like to do as a result of this meeting is at the March board meeting, which is 10 days away or so, report to the board what we discussed today, what we thought, and try to validate those answers to the questions that we're going to put. And then staff will go away and develop the proper wording, terms, and clauses to reflect the direction that we're given. That might mean that we don't bring a new procedural bylaw to the annual general meeting in April. It might be something that comes in May, but I don't think that we should get too tied down to the fact that it might be a month historically late. I think it's more important to do a thorough job and to make sure that this board has the operating procedures that enable it to do its job. So having said that, you know, I'd like to start with one of the questions that I think that we should talk about that came up in the MC advisory report with respect to the budget and how our budget is developed, and also was addressed in John's session when we were talking about options. As you know, currently the finance committee meets several times with staff during the summer, and in September, as a result of that, the finance committee makes a recommendation to the board with respect to its budget. So it seems clear to me, and the rest of the staff who talked about this, that all the directors would like to be involved in that process. And I guess we're looking for validation of that. And if we were to change our process to have all of the directors involved, it would be relatively simple to do. We would meet for the budget process, and we include in the bylaw fact that the budget deliberation and preparation will be handled by a committee of the whole rather than a committee of the board. And so that would involve everyone. Those directors that wanted to come and attend those sessions could. We would hope that all would. We would have a much higher number for quorum for a session than we have now. Now we have a committee of 5, so quorum is 3. If we went this way, our quorum would be 8. So so the question that Mr. Chair, that we're interested in hearing your discussion around is, do you think that we should move forward with a change in the way we develop the budget?
Our neighbors.
Yeah, I'm quite satisfied with the way things are, actually. I like the committee approach. They do their job, then they present to everybody as a group. People have lots of opportunity to ask questions, make suggestions at that opportunity. I think it would be a lot longer, onerous procedure to go through. Having 14 people sitting around at the table trying to just finalize the budget. Myself, anyway. And not only the time, but the money of having all those additional meetings with everybody being here. So you're looking at time, money, lunches. It would add quite an expense to this too. But that's my side. Anyway, I'm quite happy with that.
My concern is if we go with all the directors on board. What kind of outcome are we gonna have? Are we gonna have positive outcome that we're looking for? Or is it gonna be use expression off and on? And I guess we wouldn't know until we had it, but
Right.
we've seen different things in the past, that have concerned us. So I'm just wondering is it worth it to take the time to do it that way? If I was guaranteed, and you're never guaranteed anything, but if there was going to be a very positive outcome from it, then I would consider it. But I'm just wondering, if we get the positive outcome that we're looking for.
I really. This gets into a couple of different discussions that we're going to have. And one of those parts addresses some of those concerns, I think, before, but I think the budget needs to be dealt with by the entire board. We have never brought, and I have never been in a position to bring forward a recommendation that was a committee recommendation. It was a recommendation that came out of the committee meeting, but it was never supported by the entire committee. We always had some, and we'd say, well, that's most of us, and if that happens to be 4 of us on that day and 3 of us agree, then, and we're not supposed to vote, right? So we're still a little soft when we bring it in. So I agree with the issue that it would take some time to do it. The discussion, go back to your 595 rule here, and you were talking about there, is that 90% of our budget isn't questionable, unless we're going to downsize or upsize. Just it's there. The office building costs, the cost of most of staff. It's the changes that we bring. So I think those are the ones that would eat up time, but in the end, we should be able to have committee of the whole that would bring forward a recommendation to the board that would be automatically accepted or rejected. That's what I would prefer doing it in committee of the whole, and I would say that it's and I guess say that the chair should be the chair of the board. That would be the way that I would look at that. It's just a job that the board does. That's the way we operate our council. They all get to see every line before they have to vote on it. But that's just me. I would be interested in knowing one thing, it's maybe you don't want to tell us, but which would be fair. What was the vote?
On the thing.
Yeah, it was,
It was double, I just told.
yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Just, you know, in terms of, where did we go here? Yeah, so on that, it looked quite favorable to, becomes a committee of the whole process. It was basically 2-1 to the other options, you know, follow the CRSC model, current process. Modify the CRSC model, greater reporting to the board, so more increased reporting through the committee, the finance committee, or went to the committee of the whole. And there was roughly about 60% that wanted committee of the whole.
Did you have?
I totally agree with Richard.
Yeah.
This way, we be no surprises when we come to vote on the budget. And then everyone have their say, and then we can sort it all out. But it takes a lot of pressure off of me, and I'm the deciding vote.
Right.
It's ready to not always, you know, they're vote against it. And there's a lot of lobbying, so it's easier to do it as a group to me.
How long are the finance committee meetings typically?
No, we had, and how many of them do we have? It depends on come to the board, go back, come to the board. But they're not long, maybe an hour and a half.
Normally about 90 minutes on average, and I think last for the budget for this year, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, should have asked you, through you, Mr. Chair. Normally about 90 minutes, some have been longer, some have been shorter, depending on what the issues were that were being discussed on that particular day. And then they run, on average, probably 4 to 6 meetings minimum before you go back to the 30 to the 40.
What month did they start?
So the budget process typically starts in July. And August, when I say starts, it starts in earnest in terms of staff bringing together all the separate pieces that have been being worked on through May and June. Finance committee typically meets in August and receives a presentation, asks questions, asks for asks for changes. And then there'd be a subsequent meeting in August. We've not had a circumstance where we've had to go beyond 2 meetings to develop a recommendation to the board. So in total, I think 3 to 4 hours total would represent the committee's work. And then it takes a significant amount of time in the September board meeting for the entire board. And in previous years, at least once the October board meeting was entirely devoted to, you know, this is the impact of the budget recommendation. This is the impact of different amendments that have been offered. So all told, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours of meetings around the process.
So we don't meet in August
Board does not.
at all, so we could have a pretty in-depth meeting in August with the whole board to start the process.
Right.
July, August, board meetings.
Yes, we could. I would suggest to you that I think the observation is correct that it would be longer with 14 directors in the meeting. And we had talked about this from a staff perspective. We would probably recommend that the meetings be an afternoon, sort of like a 12 to 4 thing. Because otherwise there's not enough time to do a number of issues and have them discussed.
What I'm getting to though is that we could do the whole committee, the whole board
Committee of the whole, yeah.
in July and August.
Yeah,
And then after our board meetings, we could do any follow-up questions when we start in September.
this leads into another point that we get to later. And I do want to let you know, Mr. Chair, that Director Wilson, she does want to get in on questioning here. We no longer have to wait 45 days for a budget vote. We can have a budget vote within 15 days of the board deciding that it would like to distribute its budget. So the impact of that is we have a lot more flexibility come the September board meeting to our October 31st deadline to consider a budget or an alternate budget if need be.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering if, everybody's leaning this way and all the directors want to say in the budget process, could we not look at taking a Saturday, putting a Saturday aside and all the directors come together and,
To start the process, so
Start the
that's what I was
process.
getting at in the July and August meetings, we could do something in an afternoon and I see some hands raising there. Doing some long afternoon meetings maybe and to start the process, and then if in September, when we start, September, October, if we could do them after our regular board meeting to follow-ups that we would have. Dave?
Yeah. There's a reason we don't have meetings in July and August, because it's gonna be damn hard to get 14 people and staff to sit around for an afternoon in the middle of the summer when nobody's available.
Hmm.
So that's an issue right there. I mean, it's a busy time of the year for people to, do their own thing. So I think it would be difficult to get board members, you might get some, you certainly won't get all, not gonna happen.
The other, we're notoriously bad at doing work before we get here. Particularly around the budget, we wait for Mary Kay to tell us what's in the budget and what's important and how it works and that sort of thing. All that saying is that when you have a meeting to do just that, I would never expect that we would ever do it. I would agree with the 4-hour afternoon model, but there's never going to be a situation where I wouldn't think that we will come out of there with a solution. We'll come out of there with the key questions. Then communities will want to go back to their CAOs and councils and say, these are the key questions. That's most likely, if we don't do that, then we trip over that somewhere at the end of September and start all over again.
Situation.
Yeah, so it's the biggest thing we do.
Yeah, no question. It occurs to me that our timeline, our existing timeline, I mentioned that we have more flexibility. I'm not convinced that we need to do the budget in the month of August, now that it's only a 15-day turnaround. We needed to get to the board September 1st, the first week of September, to provide 45 days by the end of October. Needing 15 days, only needing 15 days, we could start. I mean, the staff is working on the budget. Well, we're starting to think about it now. But the presentation to the board could start after Labor Day. And we could still meet that deadline, presumably meet that deadline. I think if we try to solve the implementation issues of the question, we're going to get sidetracked. I would suggest to you that we might get sidetracked. I think I would encourage you to think that we can find a way, given whatever the preference of the board is, now that we have more flexibility around timing. And if it's the board's desire to have it as a committee of the whole, I feel confident that staff can develop a mechanism to allow that to happen. Or if it's the board's desire to stick with the existing process, obviously we have a template for that.
I'm just wondering, I know you do it now, John, but I'm wondering if there's an interim piece here between the July, August, September, before we actually look at the budget. If we were to spend more time looking at program changes, program modifications that will have implication for budget. So I know we do that now, and that has been a tripping point, I think, before or in the past, but.
Mr. Chair, for you, when looking at that or reflecting on it just here in the moment, perhaps that we, we were looking at having another summer forum as we did in the last 2 years. Tend to have one in January, one in July, or, in terms of that. Perhaps maybe that's where the focus shifts during that particular piece, and have that conversation that, gives that kind of prelude to into the fall for the committee of the whole process, if that were to be the choosing of the board. I don't know.
And for me, that the discussion isn't how much money are we going to spend at that point, it's what new service, what new opportunity, what new whatever are we going to have built into our program for next year. And then when we start to talk about the money, we may be able to spend more time previous to that, talking about whether it's a good idea or not to add new staff or a new area or do something here. Without having the money just being, we all should understand it's about the money too, but
Yes.
that's, in that form might be a good spot. It's just a suggestion.
Any other comments?
If I might, Mr. Chair, this kind of relates to another question that is in your staff report. Because that discussion around programming now happens in individual committee meetings and flows to the board that way. So one of the questions that the report asks you to reflect on is really fundamental. Do we want to use the committee system? Because you're not under an obligation to use the committee system. Everything could come to a committee of the whole. And it's probably good that we're not knocking these things off one at a time because they are related to each other. We could live in a world where everything came to a committee of the whole. There were no, to the board as in committee, where there were no committees. So that's something that we think we should reflect on.
You want to comment on that?
I recall last year, the most contentious issue was the expanding and hiring new staff. If it probably hadn't been for that, the budget would have went through a whole lot simpler. That seemed to be the biggest qualm that people had. But I think mostly everybody supported the fact that we needed more staff to do more work, which has been dropped upon us by the province. There was a few that certainly disagreed with it, but that seemed to be the biggest stumbling block. If that hadn't been there, I think there probably would have been, certainly would have been very little issues with the budget. And committees are set up for efficiency, to get things to go through. Any director still has the same opportunity. If a committee brings something to the board as a whole, they have the opportunity to speak the piece, whether they agree, whether they don't agree, whether they want to put more into it. So like I said, trying to sit everybody around the table, do everything committee of the whole is taking a step backwards, I feel. I mean, the committees do a great job. They're there for a reason, and they're there to move things through at a normal pace rather than get bogged down and everybody in the details. But I'm a strong believer in committees. I think they're certainly a great idea and they work really well.
I like the idea of the committees as well, but the finance committee is one that I think is where we have most of our issues, and I think everybody should sit in on them.
Yeah, but they still have the same chance to say whatever they want to say. The committee does the work, does the groundwork, gets the information together, presents it to the board, and they have ample time to either agree or disagree or add or whatever they want to say. I don't really see any big difference in it, whether they want to have any better budget coming out from the committee of the whole, doing it as committee of the whole, whether they're doing it as committee now, because don't forget, everybody gets to have their say anyway at the end of the day.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just about to say, the comment inside the MC advisory report that sort of provoked this question from a staff perspective is the quote that there was a perceived inability to revisit or negotiate after the time commitment had expired. So, the thing about time commitments and deadlines is when they expire, you don't have an opportunity to negotiate or make changes.
And they're there for a reason.
That's why you have deadlines. You have to get things done.
Yeah, but you also have that chance now that the budget not passing. But if you have a committee, then you know, you have a sense, like I said, 90% of the budget is approved, like, no issue. But it's just the little ones, and then it can be explained more and whatever, and then if they're gonna make amendments, there won't be any amendment because we'd be hashing that out. Oh,
Through the process.
yeah.
I'm a supporter of committee of the whole for a lot of reasons, but primarily because it pushes the board to engagement. And to think about each of the issues when, I'm as bad or maybe worse than some others when it comes to a committee report coming here. And it's on the agenda and I haven't read it maybe, but then I'd read it here and there's something there and I thought, oh, no. And we want to move them through quickly now. So I find for myself that, having the committee of the whole, what that does is it puts an awful lot more pressure on staff to ramp up for that first engagement, rather than at a committee level, you're wrapped up, but you're still feeling out what the reaction's gonna be, and you're doing that in a little more friendly environment, I guess, so. But we don't have a lot of things, and the big ones we all want to speak about. So if you go to committee and then you go to the board, and that the pressure when you do it that way is then that's got to be a decision. And that may be the first time that I've really thought in depth about it. I didn't read and study and debate it with my counsel, wherein the committee of the whole, you get the presentation, you have a little more time to debate, you hear the pros and cons of the other folks sitting at the table, and you learn more about the item. I think it takes time and it's a less formal kind of process. And that's why I feel that it would work better for us, is that but it really does put a lot of pressure on staff, because they got to bring not just their recommendation to the table, they have to bring the options to the table in each one of those discussions. Because if you don't bring the options, you have another meeting. And that's as simple as it is. So that's where I would be. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, through you. And that's why we're saying, and Don will address this a little later in the meeting, in terms of, what you look at for frequency and you look at for duration in those meetings. So it all depends on what people want. We're going to give you the board what it wants, but we really need to think it through and be prepared for that. Because, if we get into a more robust meeting schedule on committee of the whole, as was raised earlier, that does drive time and cost towards, that activity versus are they working on other activities or other mandated areas, that type of thing. So we are a small team. I'm not trying to persuade or dissuade or anything like that. I'm just trying to put all the facts on the table of where they should be. So. Richard.
Do we need a board meeting every month? I mean, when I realized where we were 2 years ago was a different, and councils, I think, our council's finding it out now, where we were 2 years ago with the amount of work that we had to do every month, you know, and getting bylaws passed and no one understanding it. The workload is different now. It's, so I was, there is a possibility that you can have a council, committee of the whole, and then 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, whatever, say on the schedule, you can have your board meeting. And then you have time in between, you're still having a meeting. And I think there's another piece of that that we've been talking about. And seeing, and that's the energy that the board gets when they have a chance to talk. There's an energy develops around the discussion, and we've been doing that outside of it sometimes, but it's a good discussion, so. I don't know, it's just a question for me, could we do it that way? And in our particular case, in our council, we do personal and committee, we refer to it, then 2 weeks later, we do council, but our council meetings are in home. Because the discussion's been had, and unless something changes, we just approve, and that's what it makes it work smoother for us.
Well, that's what I was thinking, through this process, you know, we're getting a lot quicker with our meetings. Our meetings are done by, we start at 6:30, we're done at 7. So, you know, if we had any pressing things, committee in the whole, we could do them right after their meeting.
So on this point, you're required to meet 4 times a year.
Okay.
You're not required to meet monthly. Somewhat ironic to hear that question, because in, I think, 2014 or 2015, I made a recommendation to the board that it meet less frequently than monthly. And that board at that time felt strongly that they needed to meet each month.
This one may too,
Well, yes, exactly. I guess we'll find out, because that's not a question that we had included in the staff report, but it is something that I put stars beside and highlighted, right? Because I think it's a relevant question to come with the rest of the larger structural issues that we're raising.
Where should we go from here? We just want to recommend to.
So the note that I've made so far is that there's, on question 1, which relates to the finance committee, being a committee of the whole, that there was no clear consensus here in this session. I heard for and against, and I think it's about 3-2 or 3-3. The sense that I have with respect to committee systems, I've heard mostly in favor of committees, with Richard being, at least at this point, the only advocate of doing away with committees. That may not be reflective of the entire board, but remember, the idea of bringing this forward to the board is to ask them those questions and let them know what you folks have already talked about, and not having consensus is a legitimate, you know, you can either be for or against, or the committee was split. And so that's how I see the responses to the first 2 questions.
That referred to as a home committee? Home committee?
I'm not sure I want to answer that.
That's a good answer to that.
So if we had a committee of the whole, my point of order never would have worked.
Well, that's true.
Now you're telling me.
The next question that comes out of the MC advisory report is it's in the report, section 3.3, talks about a desire for a safe space and open dialogue. And the consultant was advised that the meetings lack a secure platform for discussion, which prevents directors from expressing their genuine concerns or differing opinions. And so that talks about, do we broadcast the meetings live? You're under no obligation to do that. Your obligation is to have the meetings open to the public. And that means your requirement is that if someone drives to the location, comes to the door, that they can come in and have a look. So, this really gets to the question of whether it's a board meeting, a committee meeting, or a committee of the whole. What type of transparency and public, let's call it oversight, are you looking for? Because we could not, we would be, you would be within your rights to say, no, we're not gonna broadcast these live anymore. Now, that would create a locational challenge for people at the edges of our region to attend and be informed. So and the pro is that you perhaps could speak more openly.
Are you talking about committee meetings or are you?
All of it.
So how many people watch the committee?
I was gonna ask that.
Well, they're getting up there, aren't they, apparently?
We talked today about our vast viewing audience. And we now have over 600 subscribers. So each individual, that doesn't mean that 600 people watch each meeting. But and this morning in our senior management meeting, we were observing that some non-controversial meetings, in our opinion, that we have will be widely viewed by 250 people. And some that we think are vital might have 14 views. It's hard for us to predict, but there are meetings where hundreds of people view it. There are hundreds of views of the meeting. But that's live and after the meeting.
Yeah.
Are most views after or during? Because it's on YouTube, you can.
Yeah, it lives there forever. I don't have that data right now.
Can you monitor how many are actually at the meeting live?
I'm unaware of how to get that data. I know how to, like, if I click on a meeting now, it'll tell me how many times it's been viewed.
Yes.
But I don't know that I can
Oh, yeah.
get the data for how many viewed it live.
No question in my mind, I think we should continue to the broadcasting of the meetings. If you have something to say, you say it. You should be respectful at all times. If you have something to say it. You know, and I think we'd be taking a step backwards if we discontinue broadcasting, and people would say, what do you hide? What do you got to hide? But that's only like.
I certainly agree with Julie on that. It's this openness and transparency that everybody's likes to talk about today. But some people are intimidated by being on there live or recorded, and it does keep them quiet. It's just an unfortunate situation that we're into, but we're into these positions because we usually have big mouths, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't mind talking, anytime. But there's people that just don't feel like they just don't want to be open and talk at meetings because of the fact it's being broadcast. So I think it's just the way the world we live in today. People expect them to be broadcast whether they watch them or not, but they feel that they should have that opportunity. So we broadcast our council meetings, but we don't broadcast our committee meetings. So, Richard.
Yeah, I just agree, we just can leave it there. I don't see it, I don't hear it. I really like, in any case, having it on YouTube, because lots of times I'll be 6 of those viewers. Because I'll go back and check on something, what was said, what did I say, what was important in there, or what was so-and-so's reaction to something, and so those, and as far as the owl being here now, it's just another person at the table. Yes, sure.
Do you have any comments on it?
It doesn't matter to me either way, but I think the point that they made, though, if we had something now and all of a sudden we take it away, that would bring up suspicion or what are we doing wrong or what we're up to something. So now that we got it, I think we should stay with it.
Me being one not to like the public eye on me, I don't even notice the things here now, so I don't have a problem with it.
And I've never ever sat down and watched, or even their council meetings, or I've never ever watched them. I don't want to watch them.
No, never.
It just makes me more nervous or gets me more stupid.
Yeah.
I don't want to know if I really messed up.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, they are a great tool. To be able to go back to, it will review. And even for staff, I know a lot of our own staff will come in the next day and say, what happened at the meeting last night? I was, maybe they were out with a family member at the rink or whatever. And they're able to go back and see it, and it does provide that opportunity to, for everybody to have an opportunity to see what was said and what was decided.
I'd rather not look at myself on a screen here.
I'm just to reiterate, I really don't like the owl. But anyway, maybe I just don't like looking in the mirror or something.
You might not see a reflection.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So not a surprise that was unanimous. But there's a flip side of every record. And so I think we need to be aware of the fact that it's our practice to broadcast our meeting live. And when we turn the camera off, we can't continue to meet. And at the last board meeting, that kind of got dangerously close to that. So I'd be shocked if the larger board said we want to turn off the board. I'd be shocked, but we need to bear in mind that when we punch out, the meeting is over.
Yes.
So the next question came up in section 4.1 of the report, wherein it was titled "Need for Stronger Governance and Conflict Resolution." And the quote that we sort of puzzled on, directors suggested stronger governance with conflict resolution methods could mitigate tensions. So we're really at a loss here because we don't know what that means. So we're looking for some help in terms of what do you think director said to the consultant, what they meant by stronger governance? We don't know how to respond to that. We need help. Now, you may decide we don't want to respond to it, which is entirely valid. But obviously, some directors indicated this. And got any ideas?
Do we know, let's say 20, how many responded to this question, or brought this question up?
We don't have data as to how many people said it.
Okay,
So it's possible that some of the things we're talking about here are one-off or two-off.
right, okay.
I always thought we were pretty amiable bunch. We didn't have too many conflicts, very little. I think we get along good along the table. And start harping on it, we're gonna probably create more problems than we have right now.
We do have a kind of an underlying piece that's happening right now. That this may be referencing. And that is, should the board take on the government? And should we be deciding more about how we can run our business than the government can? So that's what I read when I read into that, when I saw it, was that we're hearing like we shouldn't all have to pay for our whatever if we don't want to. I don't have an agreement or disagreement with someone doing that, but then typically we have to come back to the act and say, we're sorry, the act does not allow us the latitude to do that. I thought that might be where it was coming from. That it didn't come from me initially anyway. So.
Mr. Chair, within that, to Director Corey's point, I think, when we're looking at conflict resolution, we also have to go back to some of our previous discussions on whether or not are we an entity that lobbies or not. And that was decided that would be done at the local level. But I mean, the board has the right to change its mind, but at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the fact that if we're directed to do something, we have to make sure it aligns with what we say we stand for. And then you got to look at, how that impacts what we had previously decided on how we lobby or how we approach. And I agree with Director Corey, you know, it's a difficult thing because, you know, some communities, you know, as Director Corey said, have asked, how come we can't opt out on certain measures? There's certain mandated services, but yet they're for everyone, and the act is very clear, the regulations are clear. And, you know, I haven't seen where government is looking for us to create that kind of disparity on the new mandated services. Anything that was grandfathered in, such as our planning and development, that was grandfathered in for a reason. And that developed for reasons at that time, right? But, you know, because we have 3 communities that don't participate in that, 11 that do. So I think, you know, Director Corey has a good point there, like, I think we need to clarify exactly what that is, or leave it and then address it if it raises again, I don't know.
So is this a question we could put to the whole board?
Yeah, because what I'm hearing here is the same confusion that I have, or uncertainty that we have as staff about exactly what are we talking about here. And governance is, I don't know how to describe governance as strong or weak. I mean, you have your rules and regulations, and you have your ultimate resource, and you follow those rules. And I don't know that that's particularly strong or particularly weak.
Could the person that, or people that brought this up be referring to the way the meetings are run as far as the chair's discussion and allowing things to happen in the meeting? Is that what they're referring to?
Well, it may not be a coincidence that item 4.2 in the report is procedural rigidity limiting meaningful engagement.
Hmm.
So I would take issue with the concept of procedural rigidity. You enforce your rules or you don't. You either have rules or you don't. But if the board is wishing for more laissez-faire discussions, you do that in committee. I mean, there's a concept that's been around for a long time. If the board were to meet in committee, you wouldn't have to have a motion on the table to discuss items. You would not be limited to speaking to an item once. You would not have a time limit that you have now to speaking to an item. So it's very much as described in the way that Harvey's council meets. And we can do that if that's what the board wants. But our business meetings have rules that are written to arrive at a decision. And they're stacked on top of committee deliberations. And, you know, you can't talk about it unless there's a motion on the rule. We can change those rules. But why would we change rules to mimic a meeting in committee when it's very simple to just establish a meeting in committee?
Do you have any comments or questions?
Just another comment in that 4.1. It would have been nice if we had an example clarification.
Yeah.
Because I can't vote or give extra information on something if I really don't know what I'm talking
Well,
about.
maybe this is something we should bring to the whole board and talk about this in a board meeting.
Yeah, I agree, but the one that jumps out at me here is more defined roles for committee versus the full board. And I wondered where that would come from. I mean, our committees have terms of reference that are quite clear. And they're structured, you know, and their role is clearly defined. Maybe people, I mean, you know, flip of that would be the committee makes a decision and you have to live with it. Well, that's probably not gonna work either.
Right.
So, I mean, so, or are they speaking about the committee taking too much of a position? Instead of providing data and information to the whole board. When I think about, the past ones, when I think about my own actions, for example, in the last budget. In reflection, I probably was overstepping my bounds as committee chair when I spoke about the quality of the budget we were bringing a recommendation for. I didn't at the time, but because I think I opened my remarks with calling it a good news budget. Well, it was for me. I'm not sure it was for everyone. So is that where they are? I guess is that, but I would come back to the other, that committee of the whole takes you away from that.
So I guess one thing that I would note is, you may recall that we had one, in the 2 years, we had one decision of the chair appealed at a committee. And that the appeal, the chair's decision was upheld 13-1. And our procedural bylaw did not allow that to be debated. Well, Roger's rules does allow it to be debated. One of the things that we talk about, the particular challenges that we have as staff here, is that back home, every one of our directors holds the gavel. And so they speak when they want, they say what they want, and they rule how they want. But here, there's only one gavel. And different directors deal with that differently. And so it's possible that springs from this. On these two items, we're at a loss to deliver you a solution because we don't understand the problem statement. And
Mr. Chair, I think you're gonna have a very difficult time having a set of rules and regulations and procedural bylaw that satisfies everybody. There's no way that 14 people are gonna sit around the table and be happy with all the decisions that are made and how they're made. But we do have a system, it's set up, we're guided by Robert's rules, we're ruled by legislation. We've had one, kick in how many, and it was overruled by, like I said, 13-1. So that's very telling. And I think for the most part, we have to look around the table and see how many people are more than obliged to follow the system that we're following. And I'm of the old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So no matter what we do, we're not going to satisfy everybody. So if there's a few people dissatisfied right now, it's gonna be the same if we change the whole thing completely. So for the most part, I think the board is doing a fine job. They're very well represented, and people have lots of opportunity to speak up. I never seen any meeting that we've had yet that somebody couldn't speak up and say the piece. So I'm certainly in favor of what we're doing and how we're doing it right now.
yes, thank you. I believe, this is the last question that we're curious about is the use of a consent agenda. So, we did not use the consent agenda until several months ago. We were overwhelmed with committee reports. And we put the committee reports in the consent agenda, and that was well received. And so we continue to do it. But there's a risk to that, and we bumped into it. In a meeting, in the consent agenda was a staff report speaking to whether or not this board should engage in lobbying, specifically the provincial government, but generally lobbying in general. That consent agenda was adopted without comment. And before the end of that actual meeting, the board was discussing lobbying the provincial government for something. So,
Yes.
and I think it speaks to some of the opening comments that Director Corey had. So, I guess what's the appetite for a consent agenda? I think that that's a clue for staff to be a little more robust with respect to offering things for the consent agenda. Perhaps that shouldn't have been offered. For example, we could do a committee report for this committee and slap it on the consent agenda. And I don't think as a result, we wouldn't get an answer to all of the questions that we're looking for here. So our position now is that we're just gonna look harder and more critical at things that we offer for the consent agenda, but it raises a bigger issue. Do we want to do it? Because if we have none, committee chair will give his report and you're going to hear the high points of that report. And so the ability to call it not pay attention is less. So, but it's not what works best for us, it's what's worked best for you.
Would it not be easier to do each of them individually, but not have to read through the whole?
Yes. Yeah, it would be great. At one point, we used to highlight what, as staff, we thought were the key points that the board should hear.
Right.
We weren't entirely comfortable doing that, right? Because is it up to us to determine what the high points are? I think it's up to the committee chair to determine what the high points are. I do know that there's resistance around the table to have a report they've already received read to them.
Right.
And there will be different styles for different committee chairs, so.
So depends on what we do. I mean, at one point it just disappears because everything's on the agenda.
Right.
Because we're going to vote on it because everything's been dealt with before we got there. I don't like the consent agenda. I just don't. And that's because I'm not always on top of every subject. And it comes up and if there's something buried in there, not purposely, but just buried in there, and I scanned over and then I find out the lobbying issue. Well, so that's my opinion is that I'd sooner not have the consent agenda. If we had a heavy legislative piece coming at us all the time, it might help, but I don't think we're going to have heavy. We're going to get through a few changes here and then month to month after we get a budget approved, then most of it is going to be learning about what's happening and becoming knowledgeable about things more so than making hard, firm decisions every month on a difficult subject. So.
At Hamel, we recently adopted a consent agenda. And the standard things are in the consent agenda, but there's nothing saying we can't take something out of the consent agenda that we want to talk about or wants to be brought and pointed out to council. I'm just thinking, is that correct the way we could do that? Do you always have to put the same thing in the consent agenda?
So, Mr. Chair, any item can be removed from a consent agenda if a single director wants it taken off. And we in fact had that happen with the finance committee report where Director Forsyth did not want that dealt with in the consent agenda.
So, yeah, that's what I thought the opportunity was there.
And it's not a majority, it can be a
Yes, but
single individual.
But I've emphasized to our councillors is be prepared for a meeting. Read the reports, be up to date and be prepared to go to the meeting when you're there. Don't try to read a report when the meeting is open. It's not very conducive to understanding what's going on. The same thing is for the directors around this table. Be prepared for the meeting. Be aware of what's in the package that goes out. I mean, Kelly puts a lot of time together to put a package together, and people are only trying to read it when they show up for a meeting. It's just not the way things should be done. It's up to each director, as it is to each councillor, as it is to each mayor, to be prepared for those meetings. And if you want something to take rid of the consent agenda, all you do is raise your hand. It's not a big deal. The consent agenda, for the most part, is to get rid of the stuff that's just Monday and over and over and over again, same old thing. And, you know, it speeds the meeting along. That's why it's there. Everybody likes it at our meetings, at our council meetings. It's moved along really good. It certainly saves time, but we still have some meetings that go past 9 o'clock, whether you have a consent agenda or not. So the necessary stuff is well covered, whether you have a consent agenda or not.
I'm not in favor of it. Something that's quick and easy is gonna go by anyway. No, you're not gonna kill any time by, if you're gonna vote on something.
Yeah,
So,
I find it saves time at our meetings. It certainly saves time here, but again, everybody's entitled to their opinion, so.
yeah, it would depend on what you're consenting to. So.
Yeah.
I guess to just further my point a little bit there, it's when it's a committee report. That's, if it's the minutes of the previous meeting, you know, but when it's a committee report. We have good committee reports, but committee reports are never committee reports. They're an overview of what took place in the committee. So sometimes if there's something in that committee report that I'm hearing when the chair is doing their 8 points or whatever, it might cause me to say, oh, are they thinking about, does your recommendation mean this? And that's for me, that's where I mess up mostly with this model is just think, okay, well, yeah, gone. And I also, you don't have to read anything in the consent agenda. The committee reports are there. You should. You really should, but you don't have to, because it's just gonna go. Well, that's just one person's opinion.
Well, I think either way, you know, whether you have the opportunity to read them all, or you get a consent agenda or not, people are not gonna read stuff if they haven't got the time.
Right.
Just on that point, Mr. Chair, if I may, we have a long-standing practice, long before I got here. Don and the team have developed that, and you know, our packages on average about 7 days ahead of time. And we try to maintain that at all times. So sometimes we hit a bump in the road, it might be a 5-day or a 6-day, but rarely are they any less. We normally, I would say we probably got about a 95% average of having that out the door 7 days ahead of time. And so, you know, the emphasis should be back on, you know, to what Director Morrison was saying is, you know, kind of being prepared, coming to the table, and maybe we have to emphasize that as well.
True.
I can honestly say at our last meeting, was that when we had to have that paper, the conflict of interest signed? Every member that was around this table got their homework, and one director told me, he said, oh no, I did my homework. Everyone had read their package, because they had it out, and even Tim that was online, he had already filled it out, I think, and said it again. So that's every director, and we didn't have to go chase them down, so they did read their package. It's either way for me, after that last meeting, I would say that everybody read the package. And, if we wanna go ahead and let them give their reports 5 minutes, and like they said, they're not gonna read everything out because we all know how to read, we read it. Or if you wanna put it into the agenda, they can ask to have it moved down and they can talk about it. So either way it works.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to summarize the discussion as, it might be helpful to review the rules around consent agenda and remind everyone that they can take a report off the consent agenda if they want to speak to it?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, and on a related note, I've just checked and there's one person watching this meeting.
Probably my dog's down.
So, Mr. Chair, those were the things that we wanted to bring up. Of course, we're curious of anything that that directors themselves might think can be improved inside our existing procedures. Because we're not the only one with ideas.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just noticed one thing on a related question. It asked if we'd be willing to attend 2 meetings per month. Absolutely not for me. And
I'll second that.
you gotta think about that. If you're gonna have 2 meetings a month, the extra cost. And if you're gonna feed them once in a while, like there's a big cost. I think once a month and taking July and August off, we can certainly accomplish what we want to do. And if you do have to have a special board meeting, then we can have it, but not 2 a month. My schedule just wouldn't adhere to that.
No, I like, it works now.
And what she said, 1 a month, and if we need a special meeting, so be it.
Richard,
We were just discussing, do we need one a month here?
I think it's good to have 1 a month though, because if it goes too long, even the summertime, everybody's off and there's not a whole lot happening. But during the rest of the year, things are moving at a pretty fast pace. And a monthly meeting keeps everybody up to date and informed of what's going on. So if you don't have that, then it's gonna lag maybe, well, we need 1 this month, what about next month? And you wanna have 1 every 2 or 3 months.
Gonna be
then
consistent.
It's gonna be, I think we'll turn into being a problem. So
You'd lose their massive audience.
Hmm?
You'd lose their massive audience. They'd lose
Well,
interest.
yeah, they would just exactly.
How many directors would you lose?
So from a cost point of view, so sometimes we make an argument about something that sounds rational, but if you have 1 meeting a month and 1 month that is a committee of the whole or council and committee, or excuse me, the board and committee, and the next one it's your regular meeting, that's cheaper than having all of the committee meetings. And I know what committee meetings cost. I just got my T4. So, and last year I was a winner. I don't know this year for sure, but I had the most revenue from committee meetings of anyone. So I guess I'm just saying in that decision, think about process and results rather than just simply saying, well, people wouldn't show up or they would. So, because now, and on the director's expenses, so that in answer to your question, this isn't going to be popular idea, but I can see no reason why any other community should have to pay for my expenses to participate in this board. I'm elected by the people of my community. And as a result of that election, the province of New Brunswick says, sir or ma'am, you have to be on the board of the Regional Service Commission, or you have to appoint an alternate, which can only be so and so. So you have to participate. And I'm a supporter of the people around this table being remunerated for that participation. It is because we're not volunteers. We were elected and we're paid to do our other jobs. And this is an addition that the province has brought to the table. But I think there's got to be a fairer model of my participation at committee and or particularly at the board. Maybe it's the committee, if you want to retain the committees, maybe it's just the committees that get shared by all communities. But to have my community pay my remuneration through their fees to Capital Region, I think would be a fairer model of managing the remuneration. And that's the way, that's not addressed here. That's not it's in our budget model. It's in the financial model. In here, it simply states what they'll be. But, you know, it still rings in my ears that first discussion we had with the city of Fredericton on the first budget about that kind of an issue. And where, because they contribute the largest sum to the operation of the board. They literally pay 60% of, or whatever the number would be, of the cost of me attending a board meeting. And somehow in the model that we have, I just don't think that's the way it should be. I think if I'm elected as mayor and that mayor has to do this job, and then the board says they have the right to set remuneration for participation here, they do that. My community gets the bill for that somewhere along the way, the same as they do for all other planning or whatever it is in the model. That, again, one guy's opinion of that piece. Committees, I can see would be a little. We're actually serving the whole board if you have, when you're participating in a committee, so. Just one idea, but would be an easy sell, I think.
No, it was me. That's only my opinion.
If I might, Mr. Chair. Sure. So there's a related question I want to ask at the end of responding to Director Corey's observation. And there might be one or two other directors who would agree with that position that I'm aware of. But I think, I'm not sure that the right context is being applied to that. So when you come to this table, you serve the region, you don't serve your own community. And with respect to one community paying 60%, that community is paying the same per capita as any other community because it's being shared per population. So there are people who would take issue with the fact that the statement that says we pay 60%. You pay the same per capita as others. And we all would like to look through, it's like a kaleidoscope. We're going to turn it till we get the view that pleases us the most. But it's a question that deserves being put to the board. But I'd like to add another function to this, and I don't like to fail. And I tried to pitch today, not meeting every month, which I failed on in the past. And another thing I failed on in the past was no longer compensating directors per meeting, but rather mimicking the way you're paid in council. And this is the flat rate. And so, there'll be no surprise what's in your T4 at the end of the year. If it's $200 a month, $400 a month, whatever the appropriate number is, it seems to me that you're doing a job for the region. You work outside of committee time, you work outside of the meeting, you prepare, you respond to issues, you take calls from John when he's trying to develop a consensus. So it's not all about the meeting. So, and I'll announce my bias. My bias is it's way easier for us. No more tracking the number of meetings you attend. You get your stipends, you get your mileage. It's easier for us. And candidly, I think it's fair. But I'd like to put that question to the larger board as well. So we would be curious as to what the committee's feeling is about that.
So just to clarify, you're including committee meetings in that? I think it would be a fairer model, yeah. And some people are sometimes going to work more days because they put their hand up and said, I would like to be involved in that part of the process.
Yeah.
Most directors are on the similar number of committees.
Yeah, but some meet more frequently than others. Director Corey mentioned that, if you look at our annual report, you'll see that there's a range that directors are paid. Mm-hmm. And typically, people on the finance committee make more. They meet more often. And in the past, as a result of that, certain committees were preferred by directors.
As far as the mileage goes, that wouldn't be able to change. We wouldn't be able to just have a salary and for sitting on the board.
Well, I don't think so. I mean,
There'd be no way to do that.
Director Morrison,
Mm.
you know, he has a much different commute than Director Fox, for example.
Mm.
So I don't know how we would make that even.
The way you're doing it now, I mean, if you go to a meeting, you pay it. You go to a committee meeting, you pay it. If you don't, you don't. It's not like council, council, they get their stipend whether they go to a council meeting or not. When they're penalized is when they don't attend enough meetings. They have to miss like 3 meetings in a row or 4 meetings over the year or whatnot. And then it gets into then their stipend will be taken away from them. But I know some councils are paid by the meetings they attend. And I would think that would be a nightmare to try to look after myself. It's just the way it is now is everybody partakes and, you know, I don't think anybody misses any meetings unless they're very ill or, you know, circumstances or whatnot, and they still have the opportunity to call in. So we certainly don't have a problem with absenteeism at our meetings where I don't think we have a problem with absentee meetings at the board here. So contrary to what Mr. Corey says, we are volunteers. We're paid a stipend. There's none of us here for the money. I don't think, there's certainly none on our council that are there for the money. It's a volunteer organization and you don't even want to think of, if you try to work it out on the per hour you're making, if I talk to Kevin Nicklin, I mean,
You don't have a calculator with enough digits to the right.
Plus he gives his salary all back anyway.
Yeah.
He does, yeah.
Well, and that's the prerogative of the mayor or council. They can do that if they want. You know, it's but we're certainly not paid to do the job that we're doing. So, you know, that's just my thoughts.
So I'm not sure, do you favor a per meeting or do you favor stipend? For this?
For this is a per meeting. What we're doing now works great. If
Okay,
you attend a meeting, you get paid. If you don't, you don't.
right.
It's quite simple. Why would you get paid for not going to a meeting?
Well, you know, I asked the same thing about council.
But like I said, if
Yeah, but they're locked in.
there's a problem there. If they don't go to meetings, they're gonna be.
How do you mean they're locked in?
Well, that's what they get. They get their wage and if they're not available that night, they still get their wage.
Yeah. But just because, like you said, there's a lot more to being a counselor or being a director than just attending meetings.
Right,
So, but they do get penalized if an hour set of bylaws anyway, that if they're slack in attending meetings. So, you know, there's I guess there's kind of an incentive there to attend meetings. So we did have an instance where we had to penalize somebody for not attending meetings and it was turned into quite a show, so.
so it's whatever the board wants, but it's always been curious to me that we don't use the same model that municipalities use.
Use some, I think, there's some councils that are paid for the amount of meetings they attend, whether it be a council meeting or a committee meeting.
Not that I'm aware of, certainly none that I worked on in reform or was aware of in reform. In fact, one of the jobs the facilitators had to do was to set that annual stipend for.
I don't think the act allows it. You'd have to-
I'd have to look, I've heard of it,
Yeah.
so there's some around the province that are paid for, you know, per meeting.
How would you work the alternate?
What do you mean the alternate?
I would have to pay them. If an alternate shows up. we'd
There's
have
no
to pay them.
alternate for a counselor.
No, but if you're.
There's an alternate here.
Yeah,
And by the
that's what
way-
I mean, here is what I'm talking about. If we gave like a salaried amount.
Right.
How would we handle if the
Yeah.
director couldn't come and the alternate come?
Well, that's
Right.
certainly one of the problems,
Like the
that's why it worked much better.
Well, no, I mean, you could pay the alternate for attending. Anyway. I'm getting a consistent vibe here that I did in 2015.
Yeah.
I can see which way the wind's blowing.
Yeah, exactly.
Could I just make
Yeah,
a comment, Mr.
sure.
Chair? When we first started, and that's quite a few years back. At the end of each year, we would get a sheet and who was making what, and like I attended every meeting. And this other person, like twice as much as I did, and then putting in for the meals, and you likely remember that, Don, I seen a slip. I said, what did you do? But we have the steaks in town, like, if he stayed in town, he put in for his meal and everything. Like, I just thought he was taking advantage of the board,
Well, it sure sounds like it to me.
you know, like, I mean, if I
I
say
know
it
it
down
is.
there, went and got a cappuccino or something and a donut, I'm not gonna charge it to the board.
Yeah, but that's not how we do it now, though.
No.
Yeah.
No, no, that when we first started, but I haven't seen anything like that, no.
So my point of view on that is really simple. Is that that individual did nothing wrong. If the board had a policy and they follow the policy, then they have done what is appropriate. Some people might say, you know, I don't. Right now, we can check off meal. I never have, yes, but, that's on the sheet, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, so I've always assumed.
Well, it used to be, we used to do that.
When I
Because we
saw
never
that,
had meals, but now we're.
Yeah.
There, most of the time, there's something. to
I
eat.
just assumed that that's.
So,
It's cheaper to feed you.
It's-
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
I've never done that, but I've never had to do it, but
yeah.
it's our policy. So either we change the policy and the procedure, or if I'm an individual that's more important to, because I felt I had to put it in, or I deserve that remuneration. I mean, I had to deal with, you know, government had looked at that situation up and down the crossways over the years, and they, you know, their flat rate model was what they came to, and lots of people that were traveling never had those meals. If you were someone like myself, I would never, I'd have a donut for breakfast but I'd have enough money left over at night to have my steak.
Mhm.
That's where that went, so. I'm just saying that if it's your policy, then we shouldn't, you know, I wouldn't bother myself, but that's either get rid of the policy or. Yeah.
True.
No, keep the policy, I was just making a statement, and people do take advantage of the system sometimes. Now, I must say that the directors around the table now, I don't think they would do that. And it's your inner conscious, and no, they took advantage, nothing we could do because it was in the policy, but we knew what was happening. But not everybody would do that, and the board today, I don't think they would ever think of doing something like that.
No, we have a great board in that way, and the reason we were sidebarring Mr. Chair and Director Powell, but and to Don's point, the reason that we started trying to have some interactive time prior to the meetings is just exactly at the last board meeting, we had a lunch or a dinner, if you will, prior to one, that is actually less than the per diems that would be allocated for that when we order frugally in bulk. And secondly, to that point, that's where in the first kind of iteration of the directors telling me, kind of grabbed me by the arm and saying, hey, we need some time together to develop a relationship. We need time to, so that's shifting now. But if you notice that the last, I believe everybody that's here was at that last one, at the dinner. There was didn't seem to be a lot of dead air. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of collaboration, people moving around the table, having a chat, building that relationship. And I think we're starting to transition into another level of that. We're talking earlier today in a management meeting, how do we get the directors out together in an off-site venue? Not just for a training session like we did with the winter forum, or to learn about what, we studied about ourselves. And these are areas of improvement that guided Don's thinking here today. And that was excellent. But also to go out and have that casual time together to just get to know one another and to build that regional concept. At the last meeting, at the tail end of it, when we were talking about physician, nurse practitioner, and healthcare recruitment, Director Corey had a great surmising of that, and I told people to go watch that. We talked about how the regional tourism group through Frederick and Gavin Region Tourism is bringing people together. Is it working everywhere 100%? No, nothing ever does. But we start to see people talking about some of the regional offerings that are there and coming together as a region. And on those mandated services, it's gonna take time, but we're getting there. Our public safety forums are really starting to take shape. We're having good participation, very limited absenteeism on economic expansion and infrastructure. Very rarely do we have someone that can't make a meeting. We've got that, and people are starting to see the value in coming together, you know, for the region. And I think there's a lot of good, positive pluses that we're doing that allow us to do that. And so that was that kind of first iteration, and we're gonna see a couple of events. One of the things we're talking about today was in the polling that I had done at the winter forum, in this piece that I had done, asked about trying to get the message out, trying to work with people, and looks like, you know, we're probably gonna do a couple open houses a year. Let people come in, let the counselors come in, let people from the public come in, tour the office, let them see what we do, ask questions, have everybody on site. And be able to help them understand that and build that sense of identity. And you'll see more and more of that as we go along, especially with our branding. And that's the intent for this year, is to let people know what we're doing. And for example, today in our, one of our groups in our community development side, they're looking at, they're participating in a workshop for grant writing for nonprofits and non-government organizations. So there's a real synergy out there that's starting to develop. More and more people are calling, asking, hey, how can I get in on this? Our website's improving all the time. We're getting more and more information up there, and that will continue to be developed this year. So as we go through, I think we're starting to see the board coalesce. It's just, we went through a big change, something people have been asking for over 50 years, and then they get it. And there's a lot to absorb. Yeah, like, as we all know, as we heard prior to our meeting here today, a lot to do, a lot to absorb, and a lot to work on. But are the communities starting to really forge, as Director Morrison said? We got a real good group, a lot of goodwill, a lot of good opportunities. So I think there's some really good things happening. And we just got to focus to make sure that everybody sees themselves in that win column in some way.
We're all set? Motion to adjourn?
One thing I wanted to bring up before we're going for discussion is, again, we talked about it before. Remember, we used to have, everybody was on the committee for a year, we kicked it to 2 years. Now we're coming up to another end of term, and it's gonna be people coming on board for a year. Because of the 5-year, we're stuck in for this year and last year, may happen again, it may not. But I'm thinking we should extend everybody's committees to the end of the actual election year, so we don't have that massive turnover and only a year to go into committees. So everything we've completed in the last basically 4 years may all be for naught, because if you're gone and done and everything's rearranged, what's that committee gonna do in a year? So I'd like to see everybody extended to to May of 2026, rather than have to have a whole bunch of new committees assigned for 1 year.
I agree with that.
So we definitely we bring it to the board. It's not like
Yeah.
Is that just a staff report for a one-time thing?
Yeah.
Or are you looking to extend the term past 2 years?
No, just be a one-time thing, because this time we're elected for a 5-year period due to government reform. Last year, we were elected for a 5-year period due to COVID. Usually it's a 4-year period, so the 2 and 2 fits, but this time it's 2 and 3. So, why completely upset the apple cart for the one of another year? I don't think it would make. I like to operate common sense, and to use common sense to let things go for the remainder of the term.
If that was the board's will, I think the best way to do it, to Kelly's point, I think the best way to do it would be by resolution on a one-off rather than touch the bylaw.
Yes.
No, exactly.
This should only be a one-off. I mean, surely the goodness, we're not gonna, if we're went to 5-year terms, we'd have to change. We'd have to do it to 2.5 years or something. I don't know. This is a one-off thing, I hope.
And to Director Morrison's point, Mr. Chair's review is that's exactly what some of our other groups that we do the appointments to, such as Ignite and things like that. they're asking for that same consideration so that we can get back into a cycle that is synced with the election cycle. Then they can stagger their appointments so that they have more, that they don't lose all their continuity within that, but to be able to do that, so.
Motion to adjourn?
Pal or uncle?
Here we go.
Well, that was a very interesting meeting.